Welcome to the Underdog Sniper Podcast. I am your host, MGCovers. This is episode 37. Greatly appreciate you guys tuning in. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple iTunes, glad to have you listening. And if you're watching this on YouTube live or on the replay, greatly appreciate the support. We have a ton to cover. Let me give you the lineup. We're going to talk about me, some personal stuff. I've actually been sick and I don't think I'm 100%. I think I still might have a really bad cough here, but so if I cough during this podcast, I apologize. But we're going to talk about how being sick actually relates to sports betting and why it's perfectly okay to be sick. And I think it's actually a good thing for you to be sick in your life at certain times. We're going to do the week in review. We had a positive week, cash flow wise. And then we're going to talk about all three of my models, the soccer model, NCAA basketball model, as well as the NBA model and how it relates to the margin concept. If you're interested in or want to learn how to build models, I'm going to give you some great information that can help you with that as well. And then finally, we're going to sum it up. I think each week on this podcast, I'm going to talk about fraudulent handicappers and what people do to deceive the consumer, because I think it's a big issue in our industry. And I want to continue to educate people because I think that that's how we can prevent this from happening, because there's a lot of people that are giving money to people that are not professional handicappers. And so each week I'm going to talk about maybe a technique that I see that they're doing to misrepresent sports handicapping, sports betting, etc. So let's dive into it. Week in review. We only had 10 wagers for the week. We cashed out. I cash out every Monday with my mover, meaning mover is like a runner, a person that gets money down. I try to make $1,000 a week. We cashed out just under $700, so that was positive. Last 2 weeks have been that way. So, of course, I was sick, didn't really wager the volume that I wanted to wager, but still profitable, which is the key in this business. Let's dive into some of these models here. I want to show you. First, we're going to look at the NBA model because this is absolutely fascinating when you see this. Okay, on the screen, you're looking at the NBA model, and I'll make this clear so that if you're only listening, you'll understand it. Now, a very important part of handicapping is once you have a quote model that you feel like is showing some signs of success, you have to have a process for handicapping. Sometimes you might have a model that you think is not good, but in reality, it actually is. I've talked about that many times. I've done a lot of videos on that. Your interpretation of the model could be wrong. So when you look at this model here, the thing that stands out, and one thing I had a lot of success with last year, and I'm going to give you a really good tip right out the gate, is only playing double-digit favorites via your model. And let me give you an example. So last night, Memphis was minus 19 and was basically minus 20. You scroll down, the next double-digit favorite we had was the Knicks were minus 26. The next one we had was Dallas minus basically 15. And then finally, the Clippers were minus 11. Now, if we grade just those 4 games, so my line was minus 20 for Memphis. Memphis was minus 6. They won and covered. My line for the Knicks was minus 27. The line for the Knicks was minus 12. They won and covered. And you're starting to see a pattern here. Dallas was minus 4.5 via the books line, minus 15 my line. So you had basically about a 10-point differential. They won and covered. Close game. They only won by 6. And then finally, the nightcap. Clippers were a dog. They were plus 3. My line was 11. So that was a 14-point differential. They won and covered. So they covered on the money line. Now, the point to take away from this is that if you look at the double-digit favorites via my model, they all went 4-0. Memphis, Knicks, Dallas, and Clippers. And I went back and did some research. We had a ton of success handicapping this way last year. I just looked at double-digit favorites. And so when you're handicapping, one thing that can get you stuck, and that's why if you exclusively use models, even using a model, you still need to have a trigger point. So one particular concept I'm thinking about is just playing double-digit favorites where we have value. And now granted, like if for the Memphis line, you see it, the line was minus 20. If the line was, say, minus 18, I wouldn't play it. to give that some comparison, take a look at Boston. Boston was -2 last night. The books line was +1. So granted, we had value, but it was a very, 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 very tight margin as compared to the Memphis game. And this is what Billy Walters talked about in his book. The larger the margin between his line and the books line, the more he would wager. And he did it as like a star, like he had a 5-star play, a 4-star play, a 3-star play. And then a lot of handicappers will have what they call, hey, this is a 5-unit play, a 4-unit play, 3-unit play. Same concept. So for me, I generally don't do that. I generally wager close to the same thing. And obviously we talked about the dead wager concept on this podcast before, where we want to make sure that the wager that we're placing is going to make us cash for that day. I won't talk about it on this podcast, but you can listen to the last one. So, but nonetheless, that's a very simple way to handicap, and it gives you a really good tip, because the smaller the margin, the bigger the margin, the more accurate that model should be, right? And that was the case there with that one as well. What was the other one that, let's see, I was trying to see, Boston lost. Actually, the model did really well. Miami and Toronto, you can see there on the screen, that was basically a 50-50 game. Toronto won that one. Houston won. They were -6 via the line. Utah, Lakers, let me see who won that one. Okay, Lakers barely won that one, so that one technically lost. So a good point to look at. So Boston had value, they lost. Utah had value, and they lost. And I'm playing that Utah on the money line. But anyway, a much simpler process would just simply play double-digit favorites via your model. Now let's segue and look at the NCAA basketball. And another good point in sports handicapping is, if a concept works for one sport, many times you can, transfer that over to the other sport and see if it works. So, and that's basically what you're going to see here, which is really cool. And so we're going to look and see if double-digit favorites with value had the same success in NCAA basketball as it did in NBA. So I'll give you a quick tip. You could take, if you've got an NBA model that's successful, see if that transfers over into success for NCAA basketball. If you've got a college football model that's successful, see if that translates into success for NFL. If you have a soccer model, this is something that I might end up experimenting with. If you have a soccer model that's successful, you could transfer that over into NHL, right? Because again, average goals scored in NHL is what, 6? Average amount of goals scored in a soccer is 2.5. So there might be, it might not, but you could potentially tweak it as well. So I'm going to do that this week, transfer what we've learned in soccer with goal differential, and I'll cover that later in the podcast and see if that transfers over into NHL. All right, so let's go through this and look at the NCAA basketball. And so very simple, what I did was I looked at teams that were double-digit favorites via my line, and they still had value. So for example, we'll start out with Maine, and you have and let me say this about NCAA basketball. I don't know if it mentioned it last week. In the past, this has been a very, very, very profitable sport for me. We didn't really play it that much last year. I had other focuses. I was really focused on NHL, but I think we're going to dive back into NCAA basketball and make it a daily sport that we wager on. Lines are off big time for NCAA basketball. It's just very, very difficult for the books to set lines on these games. Like, Maine and Navy, they're in different conferences. Same with Alcorn State and Maryland. Very difficult for the books to lay a solid line. So you see a wide margin, and you can really take advantage of it, especially early in the season. And so let's go through these. So Maine was -18, so it's a double-digit favorite, and we had value via the model -3. They won. Let's take a look at this next one, New Jersey. Let me pull this up on I got my phone here, so I don't want to switch back and forth to screen. But let's look here. NCAA basketball odds. Okay, so we had NJIT. Another thing about being sick, you can't even talk. Okay, my line was -12. Books had them at plus 19. So we had a 31-point differential. Obviously, we're not going to play that on the money line because of getting plus 19. They lost, but covered in that case. So as we go through this, Maryland, you look at Maryland, my line was minus 27. Books had them at minus 33.5. And that was the problem. If you remember, or if you follow me on Instagram, I showed some screenshots of how I was previously calculating this. I was just playing the top teams via the model. Had a lot of success early, but it had losing days like 4 days in a row. And I even think it had a really bad losing day on Friday when I gave this out for free Friday. So I went back, and this is very similar to how I handicapped NCAA basketball last year. Niagara minus 16. My line was minus 3.5. They won and covered. Central Connecticut minus 24. My line, Books line had them at 4.5, and they actually covered they were plus 150. You can see there on the screen there, and I marked that. So if you scroll down through here, and if you're looking on the screen, like Penn State minus 12, there was no value there. Kansas State minus 29, no value there, but we did have value with Rice minus 15. My line, Books line 4.5. That was a loss. Radford minus 19.5. We had them at minus 6. They won. So in total from yesterday, we had a total of 10 plays and went 10-5. So a total of 15 plays. And if you factor in, I just graded it. I didn't play that, just FYI. I didn't actually play these, just sort of did ghost wagers. So we went 10-5 and cashed out on even 5 units. So the juice was minus 5.5, but we won 10.5 units. 10.5 minus 5.5 equals 5 units. So again, going back to the overall concept, one thing you could do if you're building models, especially for NBA or NCAA basketball, just simply look at double-digit favorites. Because again, you're probably going to have a significant margin from the Books line. And I would say probably the way I would do this, if you had at least a 5-point margin, that's probably a good rule of thumb for both NCAA basketball and NBA. And I do want to give you a really good tip. The average margin of victory in NBA and NCAA basketball is 11. So if you exclusively play these huge spreads, now granted, teams will cover a big number, but more times than not, you will probably not be successful playing these big spreads like minus 25, minus 30. Why? Because if the average margin of victory is 11, everything is regressing back to that 11. So majority of time, that will not be successful long term. So I hope that tip helps. Let's look at soccer. And we finally got back into wagering on soccer. Let me hang on one second. I can't share this yet. I got some proprietary information I need to cover up. Okay, we can share it now. Okay, here we are with soccer. Now, again, I mentioned this a gazillion times here. Soccer has been extremely difficult. It's been like a 5-year journey, and I really feel like this last change that I made with the model is going to be profitable long term. We did a back test with it, and through about 1 month of wagers, it was extremely low volume. That was the only negative. It was extremely low volume, but it was up. Basically, through a month's worth of wagers, it was up 6 units, which was good, but again, extremely low volume. So I tweaked it. I actually had a client that showed me this. Very simple, and majority of time what works is going to be simple. He looked at just differential. Now, I've calculate differential for soccer different than probably what you'll see on a lot of sports betting sites. It's a very sharp approach, and we'll go through this, each one of these now. So Manchester was playing Everton. They were a 5-point goal differential. They won. Liverpool was a 6-point differential. They won. And we actually played Liverpool yesterday, which was a really solid wager. So at that point, I decided to jump in and wager. Now, look at this one. This team here from the French league, they were a 3-point differential, but they lost. They were away. And I'll go through all these because this is really good when you see the final results of this. Okay, this team right here, Angers from the French league, they were a 3-point goal differential. They were like over plus 200. They won. Here's another away team, with a 3-point goal differential, they lost. Now, the trigger point for this, and that's very important to have when you're doing models, just like I talked about with NBA or NCAA basketball, you have to have a trigger point because you want to take all the subjectivity out of it. Because if you don't have a trigger point, you'll get stuck and you won't be able to play. You just won't be able to pull the trigger. So that's why it's called the trigger point. So the trigger point for soccer is going to be a 3-point goal differential or higher. And I'll play up to, say, minus 150, maybe a little bit more than that. And they have to be a home team. I'm going to show you away teams now just so you can see this total. All right, Mans over Hoffenheim. Mans was a 4-point goal differential. They were at home. They won. Frankfurt was a 5-point differential. They won. And another idea or concept that I could incorporate, I could say, okay, we will play away teams, but that goal differential needs to be higher. So meaning like you could say, okay, I'll play home teams with a 3-point goal differential higher, and I'll play away teams if we have a 5-point goal differential higher. All right. There's Lazio there, the 4-point goal differential. They lost. Or maybe it was a draw. And then finally, Napoli there won. They were away. And then Juventus, that match was a draw. They were a 3-point goal differential. They were away. They lost. Real Madrid, that was a really high juice game, like -3. It was over minus 300. They were a 5-point goal differential. They won. And then finally, Betis was a 3-point goal differential. They were away and lost. So back to my point, the only away side that won had a 5-point goal differential or higher. Now, if you go back, this is a really good exercise. And again, if you're listening to this podcast for the first time, a very important part of my handicapping, the way that I teach and the way that I actually handicap, is I incorporate statistical properties into my handicapping. And what statistical properties are facts about that sport. Home teams in soccer win the highest percentage as compared to the draw side or the away side. I think if you average it out, home teams win about 45% of the time. Draws about 30%, away side about 25%. The draw on the away side can vary, meaning some leagues, the away side might win, 35%. The draw might win 20%. But nonetheless, the home side wins at a higher percentage than the away or the draw side. So watch this when we go. So this was 7-5. So the 3-goal differential or higher overall was 7-5. So it was profitable. Now let's say if we just looked at the home teams, Manchester United 1-0, Liverpool 2-0, Mans 3-0, and Real Madrid 4-0. So how cool is that? So then if we just look at all of the home teams went 4-0. If we incorporate home and away, it's 7-5. So again, that just goes to prove how important statistical properties are in every sport that you handicap, right? Trying to think another one, like for NHL, for example, home favorites win a very high percentage of the time. So if you have a home favorite in NHL and maybe you have value via your model, maybe you have line movement, that's more than likely a really, 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 really solid play. So yeah, super fascinating. So I'm green light basically with soccer, meaning like I think I'm going to pretty much wager any home team with a 3-point goal differential higher and, up to minus 150. I don't want to do anything crazy like that Real Madrid. I think they were minus 371. I just don't think that's a good wager. You might have sharps that disagree. The reason I don't is, again, the business is all about cash flow. If you lose that wager, you're down, 3 point. I don't know what the line was. Let's say it was minus 371. You're down 3.7 units. So now you got to win 4 matches in a row to overcome that. And there's really no need to play something like that because realistically, let's go back there. So if you cancel out, if you don't play that one, if you just played the 3 I mentioned, Manchester United, can't remember the line on that. I think I'm not sure what it was. I can't remember. Liverpool, I know, was plus 105. That's what we played, Mans. So there you would have gone 3-0, and you wouldn't have had to risk that big one. So again, that's probably what it would look like. And this particular way I was capping was profitable on Friday. I sent that out on Free Fridays, which if you're listening to this podcast for the first time, I do something on Instagram called Free Fridays. I give out all my lines for all sports. So if you follow me on Instagram, it's MGCovers. There's a link in the description of this video and also on the podcast where you can go over to Instagram and click follow me there, and you'll get access to all my lines for all sports on Fridays. So pretty cool. So super excited about soccer, and think we can make this a year-round sport and maybe even rival the success we had in Major League Baseball. Okay, next I want to talk about, I've been sick this week, and I'll share you some personal information with you. I just turned 56. So if you guys wondering how old I am, I'm 56. I don't feel it. Hopefully I don't look it, but that's what I am. So I went out for my birthday, was the 19th of November. Then that night I started to feel like I was getting sick. So I was sick for 3 days. And then I went to spend time with my adult kids. I got 3 kids, but they're all adults now. We had a great time. Still not 100%, but making the comparison between being sick, I think it's actually in your life. I think it's actually good to be sick, because what happens is when you're sick, I am a terrible sick person. I'm not a lot of fun to be around, very grouchy, but the benefit of being sick, it makes you appreciate when you're healthy, right? So I think it's good to suffer, and I think it's good to be sick, because again, it makes you appreciate your health when you do heal, because you feel so much better just to not have congestion or whatever it is, cough, etc. And it's the same in sports betting. You will always get humbled in this business. You will go through losing skids, and that's important because you learn to appreciate and respect how difficult this business is. Very, 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 very difficult business. If you go through a losing skid, when you finally get out of that losing skid and start winning again, makes you appreciate and have so much more respect for that business. Okay, let's wrap this up. I want to talk about something that handicappers do. I don't know if I can show this or not. Hang on a second. Let me pull this up on my screen. No, that's not it. Here we go. All right. So this is a screenshot from a handicapper. And I'll read this. This is a tweet. He said, our 2-unit plays tomorrow. No, I think he's saying they have 2-unit plays the next day. After the win today, we are 138 and 68 on 2-unit plays, good for 67%. Okay. Now, I don't know if this is legit or not. My guess would be no, but again, there's no way to prove it, because 67% over 200 plus wagers is an extremely high percentage. I mean, it could be legit. And this is another important thing to do, or that handicappers should do. And you can basically call people out on this. If anybody throws out a big number, they should be able to prove that number through documentation. Meaning, like, if he says I'm 130, 38 and 68, there should be somewhere to go on his website so that you can at least see this. And let me show you one thing I did to my website and updated this. So I actually created a year-to-date tab. So you can see there for NHL, minus 7 units, soccer. We finally got back into positive for soccer, plus 0.14 units. NBA, 4.5 units in the hole with NCAA football, I'm sorry. NFL positive, Major League Baseball, we're positive. In the beginning of the year, we're positive with NHL for a total of 49.93 units. And in addition to that, you could actually break down each individual sport. So you could go over here and you could see MLB, you could see NHL, you could see NCAA football, you could see NBA, all the wagers, you could see NFL, you could see soccer, and then you could see NHL from this previous year. So again, going back to the premise of what's most important about this industry is that majority of what's promoted in our industry is short term. And if something is promoted long term, there's no way to verify it, right? And so anytime you see a handicapper that promotes something like, oftentimes you'll see them, hey, we're on a 14-4 run. And they're using that as validation or using that as credibility. They would say like, hey, we're 14-4. You should basically sign up with us because we're on a 14-4 run. Well, if you've listened to this podcast long enough, you know that they're going to regress from that, which means they're not going to go 14-4 on their next wagers. So it's absolutely the worst time to actually join their service. Now, the second point about that, if they're successful short term, and the majority of what's promoted majority of handicappers promote short term. Why is that? Why do majority of handicappers promote short term? It's because they don't win long term. That's just a fact. Talked about this last week. Bob McCune said 3% of the people that wager on sports are profitable. I think it's closer to 5%. So the reason that people don't promote long term is very simple. They don't win long term. And let me show you another sports betting website. We'll look at this. And again, I'm not throwing shade on this site here. I'm not going to mention it on the podcast, but if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. And again, I have no beef with this company. It's basically a big sports betting website where they have several cappers. You see a lot of this in the industry. And if you look over here on the right, they have something called Who's Hot. They have the last 3 days. They have the last 7 days. They have the last 30 days. And I have looked all over this website. There are no year-to-date records on this website. So if only a small percentage of people are profitable in sports betting long-term, and if all of these cappers are professionals and they're all profitable long-term, why wouldn't you promote long-term? Because that would be validation that they can do it long-term. Again, I'm not saying these guys are not profitable long-term, but if they were profitable long-term, you should show their long-term record. You should, instead of showing last 3 days, last 7 days, last 30 days, they should show year-to-date. And I think part of the problem in our industry is that the majority of people that buy services like my service have equated success in sports handicapping to people that win short-term, because that's all that's promoted. Hey, we're on a 15-5 run. Let me sign up with this guy. This guy, we're up 30 units in 2 days, which they're not. But again, part of the problem is the people that buy services like mine are ignorant. The majority of people are. So it's very easy to sell those people, right? It's basically sold on emotion. So a big tip for you, even if you're not a client of mine, if you do sign up with a service, what you really want to look at is you want to look at their long-term record. And let's do this. If you made it this far in the podcast, I'll do this week. If you do this as well, we'll kind of make this a group project. And I would appreciate the support. I'm going to email some handicappers and ask them, and this is what I'll say. I'll do it on my personal account. Hey, I'm interested in signing up to your services. Do you have your year-to-date betting log? I promise you, the overwhelming majority will not have it. They'll come up with some BS line about whatever. Or they just simply won't respond, or they won't have it. And the ones that do have it, it's more than likely will be fraudulent. And if it takes them a long time to create that, more than likely it's fraudulent. So if somebody asks for my year-to-date record, I could send them to the website and they could see it. Right? So let's do that. I'll email some handicappers, because more than likely, if you're in sports handicapping or you wager or you follow me, more than likely you got a ton of ads that pop up on Instagram. But how about DM a few of those people and ask them, say, hey, I'm interested in signing up for your services. Can you send me your year-to-date betting log? And screenshot and send me their response. You can send it to mg@mgcovers.com, or you can send it to me on Instagram or Twitter DMs as well. So anyway, a lot to cover. Can't believe I didn't cough much during that podcast, so my medicine was working. Greatly appreciate you guys tuning in to this podcast. Like, subscribe, write a good review on Spotify or Apple iTunes. Greatly appreciate that. Talk to you guys this week. Peace.